The night was silent, save for the distant creaks and groans of an old house. The kind of silence that seems unnatural, almost too quiet, like the world itself is holding its breath. A single lamp flickered, casting eerie shadows that stretched across the walls, adding to the sense that something was lurking just beyond sight. You could almost feel the weight of the darkness pressing in. What you're about to hear isn't just another ghost story to pass the time. These are allegedly real-life horror tales. Stories from people who swore they experienced things that defy explanation. Stories that, once you hear them, might change the way you look at the world. These are the kind of stories that stay with you long after you've turned off the lights, creeping into the corners of your mind when you least expect it. And just so you know, there's no happy ending here. No comforting conclusion where everything makes sense. These stories are strange, disturbing, and possibly, just possibly, true. But once you hear these, there may be no going back. You might find yourself wondering what's real and what's not, questioning everything you thought you knew about the world. Are you ready to dive into the unknown? It started just like any other night. Sarah was alone in her apartment, scrolling through her phone, the hum of the city outside a constant background noise. It was 2 a.m. when the phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but she picked up anyway, thinking it might be a wrong number or a late-night prank. "Hello?" she said, half expecting a friend to be on the other end, maybe joking about something ridiculous. But what she heard next wasn't a friend's voice. It was deep, distorted, almost like something was trying to mask its true identity. "Sarah, I'm right outside your door," the voice rasped. At first, Sarah thought it was a joke, but a cold chill ran down her spine when she glanced toward the door. She could have sworn she saw a shadow move past the crack beneath it. Her heart raced, and she quickly hung up. But just as she was about to dismiss the call, the phone rang again. This time, she didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her keys and cautiously went to the window. She looked out at the street below, scanning for any signs of movement. The streetlights illuminated the empty sidewalk, and the only thing moving was the wind. Nothing was there. Still shaken, she convinced herself it was a prank and tried to go back to bed. But the calls didn't stop. They came every hour, each more frantic and desperate than the last. "Sarah, I can see you," the voice said one time. "I'm so close. I can hear your breath." Sarah quickly hung up, locking her doors and closing all the blinds. Her mind raced, but she tried to stay calm. It was just a weird coincidence, right? Just a sick prank. But when she finally went to police, things took an even darker turn. They checked the apartment security footage, hoping to find some evidence of who might be messing with her. What they found sent chills through her body. The footage showed Sarah's front door, wide open, and there was no sign of anyone leaving. John and his friends couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. After they dropped the old woman off, they sat there for a moment in stunned silence, processing the strange encounter. "Did she seem off to you?" One of John's friends, Mark, asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. John nodded slowly, his thoughts racing. Something about the way she had spoken, her slow movements, the deep sadness in her eyes. It was as if she had been trapped in time, like a ghost. But John was no believer in supernatural phenomena. He tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just the isolation of the road playing tricks on them. But when they turned around and head back the same route, things began to feel even stranger. The fog had grown thicker, swallowing the road in its dense white shroud. The headlights of the car barely pierced through, and every turn seemed to twist and distort in ways that felt wrong. John's heart started to race as they approached the spot where they had dropped the woman off. He drove past slowly, scanning the sides of the road for any sign of her. But there was nothing, just the cold emptiness of the woods, stretching endlessly into the darkness. She couldn't have gotten this far, right? Mark asked, his voice trembling. "No way," John muttered, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. Maybe she turned back into the woods, or, I don't know. But just as they passed the intersection where they had dropped her, John's eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, and there in the reflection, for just a split second, he saw her, the woman, standing in the middle of the road, staring directly at the car. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes were wide open, unblinking. But before John could even react, she vanished. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone, as if she had melted into the fog. "Did you see that?" John's voice shook. He slammed on the brakes, causing the car to screech to a halt. His friends were silent, staring at him, as though they hadn't seen anything at all. They drove around for another hour, retracing their path, hoping they had just imagined it. But there was no trace of her, not a single sign. The cold fog had swallowed everything. Later that night, as John lay awake in his bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the woman, the way she had vanished so quickly, the way her eyes had looked, unseeing, yet filled with so much sorrow. It didn't make sense. People don't just disappear like that. People don't vanish without a trace. The next day, he decided to dig deeper. A search on local news sites didn't uncover much. But then he found something, a cold case file from 5 years ago. It described a woman named Elizabeth Green, a local resident who had disappeared without a trace during a trip to visit family. She was last seen walking along the same stretch of road John had traveled with his friends. Her description matched the woman John had picked up exactly. Her frail figure, the way she moved, her expression. But what made John's blood run cold was the final line of the article. Elizabeth Green's body was never recovered, and there had been no leads since her disappearance. John's mind reeled. The woman they had picked up wasn't just someone lost on the side of the road. She was the very same woman who had disappeared, a woman who was never found. But how could she have been alive, appearing so vividly, talking to them? Could it be possible that they had encountered her ghost? And what if it wasn't just a ghost? What if she had been stuck in a time loop, forever reliving that last night she was seen? What if her soul was trapped, bound to the road where she had vanished? John couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized the woman's appearance wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. But what was it? David had always been a skeptic. He believed in facts, in what could be proven, in science and reason. But when his family moved into the old farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania, something began to chip away at his convictions. The house was beautiful, spacious, secluded, and full of charm, but there was something about it that didn't sit right with David. Maybe it was the unsettling stillness that seemed to hang in the air, or maybe it was a strange history surrounding the place. It had been abandoned for years, and when they moved in, there was an overwhelming feeling that they were being watched. But David, ever the skeptic, brushed it off. Houses just had that kind of history sometimes, right? Old creaks and groans from settling wood, strange noises from wind or animals. It was all easily explainable. At first, it was small things, objects being out of place when they knew they had left them where they were supposed to be. But as time passed, the incidents grew stranger, more unnerving. One night, while David was sitting in the living room, reading a book, he heard what sounded like footsteps coming from upstairs. His first instinct was to chalk it up to the house settling, But it wasn't like any creak he had heard before. These were distinct, deliberate steps, slow, heavy, as if someone was walking across the wooden floors. He called out, thinking maybe one of his children had gotten up. No response. Slowly, he got up and walked toward the staircase. But just as he reached the bottom, the footsteps stopped. David stood there for a moment, staring at the dark hallway leading up to the second floor. His heart began to race, but he still refused to believe it. It had to be something logical, something he just hadn't noticed before. He turned back, walking toward the kitchen to grab a drink, tried to shake off the feeling that had begun to creep up his spine. But as he entered the kitchen, the air grew colder, a sudden, unnatural chill that made him shiver. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He felt it then, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. He spun around, but there was nothing there. The coldness lingered, and his breath came out in short, sharp puffs. He turned the light on, but it did nothing to ease the unease in his gut. That night, when David went to bed, he felt a strange weight on his chest, as though something invisible was pressing down on him. He could feel it, even in his dreams. Cold hands gripping him, pulling him deeper into an abyss. In the morning, David found something he couldn't explain. On the bedroom door, deep gouges were carved into the wood. They were too precise, too deep to have been made by anything natural. The scratches were jagged and long, as if something had clawed at the door from the inside. He tried to convince himself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or some other creature that had gotten into the house. But when he checked the room, he found nothing, no signs of break-in, no evidence of an animal, just the scratches. And they were deep. Over the following days, the strange occurrences escalated. The footsteps returned, but this time they were more insistent, as though someone or something was trying to get his attention. Objects were moved from their places. Doors slammed shut on their own, and David began to notice something even more disturbing. His dog wouldn't go into certain rooms. It would bark relentlessly at empty corners, its fur standing on end, its eyes wide with fear. And when David tried to follow its gaze, there was nothing there, only shadows that seemed to stretch just a little too far. But the worst came one night, when David was woken by a loud bang from downstairs. He grabbed a flashlight and made his way cautiously to the stairwell. But before he could even take the first step down, a force, invisible but undeniable, shoved him backwards. He tumbled down the stairs, his flashlight skittering across the floor. When he finally stood up, blood rushing to his head, he looked around. The house was eerily still, but the presence he had felt for so long now seemed more tangible, more suffocating, as though it was no longer content to simply watch him. It was trying to make him leave. David's disbelief had evaporated. There was something in that house, something ancient and angry. It was no longer a question of what it was, but why it had chosen to torment his family, and, more disturbingly, why it wouldn't let them leave. These stories, each terrifying in their own way, leave us with more questions than answers. Were they just coincidences? Or is there something out there, lurking just beyond the veil of what we can see, waiting for us to uncover it? Sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones we see, but the ones we can't explain, the ones that leave us questioning what's real and what isn't. For John, it was a haunting vision of a woman who had vanished long ago, yet appeared to them in the fog. For Sarah, it was the unsettling calls from someone or something that seemed to know her every move. And for David, it was the oppressive force that haunted his family's home, pushing him to the brink of terror. The supernatural has a way of revealing itself in the most unexpected places. And once it does, there's no turning back. What was once rational becomes uncertain, and what we once believed to be safe becomes terrifying. So, ask yourself, are these just bizarre stories told to make the hairs on your neck stand up? Or is there something more to them? Something we can't yet understand? If you've experienced something strange or unexplainable, something that still chills you to your core, share your story in the comment below. Because who knows? Your story might be the next to haunt us. And if you're still brave enough, make sure you subscribe for more disturbing, allegedly real horror stories. You never know when you might hear